Hello, and welcome along to another episode of In Conservation with the Zoom series of live interviews, which are actually, you'll see in the future on YouTube, but are live at the time. I'll be talking to people within the world of conservation who are kind of movers and shakers, who are doing great things in various different sort of spheres, ranging from writers through to researchers through to whoever. It doesn't matter who, actually, as long as they have some kind of connection with conservation and the natural world. Um, Today, and by the way, if you are watching this in the future, please like and subscribe on YouTube. Tell all your friends about it. There's a ton of different interviews on here, 140 plus at this given moment. But by the time you look, there might be a load more. Tell all your friends, like and subscribe. And if you aren't a member of the Urban Bird of World community, become one, because at the end of the hour that you'll be watching, there's a Q&A, but you won't see it unless you are a member of the Urban Bird of World community. So I'll check that out, Google it. So tonight, this afternoon, I am very happy to have a good friend of mine who goes by the name of Alvaro Jaramillo. Jaramillo. Now, how do you pronounce it? Am I pronouncing it right? Jaramillo.
Yeah, it's Jaramillo. Yeah.
Jaramillo. See, yeah, I mean, I'm based in Spain, and my Spanish is terrible, almost as bad as my English. It's just awful. Uh,
Well, and that Spain Spanish is different, right?
yeah, it is. If I was in Mexico or Colombia, it'd be a lot easier. I'd probably be very fluent by now. Alvaro, welcome to In Conservation with. Where are you and how are you?
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm in Half Moon Bay, California, where I live at home right now. So I'm doing well, kind of recuperating from an amazing trip to India and preparing for another trip to Japan in a few days.
So this guy, I mean, I think I travel a lot. A lot of people think I travel a lot. This guy has been around the world in a couple of weeks, and he does that every 5 minutes. I mean, he's always out and about. We'll talk about that a bit more. But let me just actually, for those who don't know of Alvaro, because I would assume people in the UK, birders especially, may not necessarily know who you are. But you are the owner of an international birding tour company called Alvaro's Adventures. You were born in Chile, and you
Mhm.
began birding in Toronto, where you lived as a youth, and you trained in ecology and evolution with a particular interest in bird behavior. Research forays and backpacking trips introduced you to the riches of the neotropics, where you've traveled extensively. I'm obviously having trouble speaking today. You are the author of Birds of Chile, a portable field guide and very authoritative to the birds of Chile, of course. And for some time, you've also wrote the Identify Yourself column in the Birdwatchers Digest magazine, which is a big magazine in the US for those who don't know.
Yeah.
You are the author of a major New World Sparrow chapter for the Handbook of Birds of the World, now called Birds of the World, and a new ABA, American Bird Association, field guide to birds of California. You were granted the Essenman Medal by the Linnean Society of New York, awarded occasionally for excellence in ornithology, and I can totally vouch for that. This man is an excellent ornithologist, and I will tell you why shortly for those who don't know. And for the encouragement of amateur bird watchers, well, that's another thing you do very well. You organize and lead international birding tours, as well as a full schedule of pelagic trips in Central California, which I would love to come on. I look at your
Oh,
pictures
yeah.
on Facebook, and I'm looking at your tufted puffins, for example. I'm thinking I want to be out there seeing these shearwaters and seabirds. Recently, you started this whole new membership community called Birding Your Best Life, relating to birding and enjoying birds. So that is interesting. Actually, let's start with that. What is that community about?
It's a membership community where we talk about birds, and I have courses, classes, and workshops. A lot of it has been about bird identification, but we're branching out um, for example, tonight I'm giving a talk on understanding migration. So I try to incorporate biology, birding, and make it palatable, right? So we're not looking at charts and graphs of things, but just the big picture. And it's been growing, it's as these things are sometimes take a while to sort of get people to understand what it is, and that they take a chance and kind of get in on these things. It's not what we've usually done in birding, right? It's always been magazines and belonging to a chapter of a certain bird club, and these online um, ideas, as you have pioneered, are new, and so I'm really excited to be able to do this, and it's things that live, so you do them and they're accessible, and each time it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's kind of wonderful to see. I'm very excited about it.
That's fantastic. Well, good luck with that. I first met your good self in the middle of a North Atlantic rainforest in Brazil. I want to say 2018, something like that.
Like that
Yeah, around that time.
before we're all shaken up by this COVID thing. Yeah.
That was before COVID, was it not?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
yeah. So I met you there, and I must say I was taken by you because your knowledge and enthusiasm for the subject was incredible. I'm very drawn to people who are teachers. I mean, I consider you a teacher, and as I say, for me, you're one of my heroes in terms of birding heroes because no, seriously, because and I'm really glad I got you on this, and I'm recording this live on in conservation because I want people of the world to know this. But I mean, you go to your Facebook page. I'll follow your Facebook page religiously, and it's really interesting that you make comments about birds that you may not necessarily have thought of before, and you talk about the possibility of them being slightly different to the dominant race, or have you noticed this about that? And I really, it's really good to think about things. I like the fact that you ask questions and you come up with suggestions for answers, which I think is one way of, in fact, a massive way of growing in terms of knowledge and in terms of experience. And it's something that I think is sadly missed sometimes. People tend to just accept what's around and then not even think anymore. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I've kind of had this retrospective look at my life as a birder and so forth, and I think a lot of bird watchers, birders are gonna um, see that there's sometimes experts out there who really are interested in knowing things, and that is almost like the the goal for me. Knowing things is not all that important, but learning things is what is the importance. You'll never know all there is to know about birds, but every day you can learn something new. And if that's what I'm excited about, I'm more excited about the moving forward and getting people involved in this kind of journey of asking questions and not necessarily being right or wrong. Being right or wrong doesn't matter as much as, hey, do we know a little bit more today than we did yesterday? So that's kind of where my mind is at with birds,
Yeah, well,
and it's fascinating.
I love that attitude. I think it's a very positive attitude. And I felt embarrassed once, I think last year, or maybe the year before last, a common nighthawk turned up in the UK. I mean, there's a bird that comes every year or so. There might be one or two recorded. And normally, some lucky soul sees one flying around a lighthouse in the Isles of Scilly or somewhere in the middle of, the Orkney Islands or have you, and then it's gone. I mean, there's been a couple of really interesting records of this species, including one in London, believe it or not, that was found half dead, moribund, in the
Mhm.
80s. And for those who don't know, common nighthawk is a nightjar, one of the nightjar family. And anyway, a nighthawk turns up in Britain somewhere and is sitting in someone's garden. And I think someone who had the garden took a picture of it thinking it was a nightjar, and it was quickly identified as a common nighthawk. And there was a whole thing on Facebook about it. And I remember you put a note there saying, "Have you considered it to be an Antillean nighthawk?" Look
Right.
very similar. Okay, it's not been recorded as a vagrant yet, but it's worth thinking about that. And I think you've supported it with a few interesting notes on it. And what embarrassed me was someone wrote directly under you and said, "We British birders know what we're doing." And I'm like, what? Did I just read that? And I thought, do you not want to learn anything? Do you not want to think about something? Do you not want to consider
Right.
something? I was
Yeah.
very embarrassed.
No, it that's the thing is like it's not, you want to get to the point where these things, you do know that it's a common nighthawk versus an Antillean, but until you ask the question, how do we know it is one versus the other, rather than assuming because it's the one that's always shown up here, rather than thinking, boy, I mean, maybe half of these have been Antillians that we have never known because they call is the main way you identify them. And we haven't really sorted out how you identify them visually. So to me, it was a valid question and it wasn't a critique. To me, it was a really interesting thing but I think in the Twitcher world, if it's an unknown, right? It's sort of Nighthawk spa. I then you can't count it, and if you can't count it, then it's almost like it doesn't exist. Therefore, I think some people took my comment in that negative sense. Well, it was more of a like, hey, let's try to figure this out. My end, I grew up reading British Birds magazine and always thought the British birders really, really were ahead of the North American birders, at least, when I was a youngster. And I thought, oh boy, if anybody's going to figure this out, it would be British birders. But so in a sense, I put that question out because I thought, here we go, other minds, different minds that can look at this problem,
Yeah, it's interesting because as a young guy, I mean, I didn't have any mentors as a birder when I was a kid, but when I got to the age of around 18, I was lucky enough to meet the late great Peter Grant. And for those who don't know who Peter Grant is, he is the father of the Collins Bird Guide, one of the fathers, founding editors, I suppose, of the book. Superb bird. Did you know about this guy, Peter Grant? Do you know
Mhm.
about him? Yeah. So basically, when I met him, I couldn't believe what he knew, and I thought to myself, if I just knew 5% of what he knew, I'd be telling the world. And he took me under his wing. I remember going to the Yards of Scilly and he was there. He just took me under his wing. And for that week, I think it formed the foundation of my knowledge that I have today, really. And I remember a marsh warbler turning up in on the Yards of Scilly, and everyone rushed as a load of twitchers looking at this warbler. And the marsh warbler is quite difficult to tell apart from the reed warbler. And
Yeah.
anyway, people saying it's a marsh warbler, and everyone's saying, yeah, marsh warbler. And then Peter Grant came and he said, no, I think it's an aberrant reed warbler.
Huh.
It's like, and then he said, because, and he named, he sort of cited three or four different examples as to why it should be a reed warbler. He wasn't saying it was definitely one, but when he
Yeah.
said all that, I said to him, I thought to myself, oh, in that case, I'm going to ask questions from now on. I'm not going to just take what I see as read. And
Right.
what you've just said earlier, in Extremadura in Spain, I'm always, looking at various things. I remember seeing a small dunling, and I took photos of a dunling, and I thought, actually, is it a dunling? Could it be something else? And I remember sort of putting it out to some people, and some people came back to me as if I was stupid, as if, oh, well, it's a dunling. What's what? But I wanted to know, why was it small? Tell me that. Tell me why it's a dunning,
Right.
actually. You know.
Right.
And Killian Milani, another hero of mine, he came back and he immediately and said it's an Arctic race of the dunlin. It's unusual to be seen so far south or whatever. And I learned from that. But I think
Right.
people are often too scared to ask questions, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think it's our culture in birding that you are not supposed to ever be wrong, which is weird. It's unusual, right? If you go out and say, oh, look, here's a semi-palmated sandpiper, and in fact, it's a dunlin, the more common expected thing, out in the UK, you will forever be known as the one who got the dunlin wrong. rather than, hey, it gets corrected. And me as a birder, I learn from that error, and we've all actually grown in our knowledge. And even the discussion between the experts about this, a potential bird is something we can learn from. So I don't know why we're so scared of just being wrong at times. And I think for bird identification, the way you really learn is to really sort of say, to identify something and say, I think it's this. And you might be wrong. And if you are, that's when you learn. If you're right, it confirms that you've been learning. And
Yeah,
and I think that's fine. But we don't allow it. We have absolutely you get something wrong publicly, you're essentially relegated to some obscure part of the birding world where nobody can talk to you.
exactly. I mean, I remember someone putting up a picture of a gull, an immature gull, on Facebook, and I just wrote down, I think it's a lesser black-backed gull. And it turned out to be something else. And 6 months later, I was at the British Birdwatching Fair in England, and someone came up to me and just said, lesser black-backed gull, like that. And I said, yeah, and? He said, well, and he got embarrassed. He said, it was a great black-backed gull. I said, that's great. And then, what more could he say?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
incredible.
I
Um,
know we're changing, I don't know how it exactly is in the UK or in Europe, but I find that a brand new set of especially newer birders, younger birders who are looking, they're not actually looking for lists and that competitive side of birding. They're looking for birding as this wonderful kind of hobby to do, sometimes just to learn about something they never really even considered, and suddenly it's open to them. And they have a much more open way of seeing birding and knowledge and learning and enjoyment. And I think we're changing, and I find that this is good. Although sometimes the older birders are like, well, these new people don't know anything. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. They're enjoying birds. That's what we want. We want a whole world of people enjoying birds. That's what we want, right?
exactly, yeah. I mean, I can give so many examples of older birders or more established birders sometimes dissing other birders because they're interested in a odd looking chiff-chaff, which I
Yeah,
wouldn't be interested in personally. But they'll say, "Why are you obsessing over just a chiff-chaff?" You know, but so what? You learn so
right.
much.
Yeah. And for me, a chip chap, I see these when I travel. I'm like, oh my gosh, a chip chap. I love the name. I love the fact that this is something that I know that it's an important deal that as a birder in the UK to know the willow warbler from the chip chap and how you learn that. But to me, it's just like, oh, what a wonderful little bird. It licks its tail and does its thing. And I come from it almost like a brand new, like a novice birder, thinking this is the most spectacular, unusual bird for me as a North American.
Yeah, but
So
it's the
good
same when I
perspective.
it's the same when I go to America. I love looking at American robins, and I hate
Yeah,
that phrase junk bird. I hate
yeah,
it. Hate
yeah.
it. There's no such thing as a junk bird apart from maybe one of those hybrid ducks or whatever. But
Right, right.
you know,
Franken, we call them.
I mean, it's just amazing seeing these birds, and we should be enjoying them, as you say, for what they are, not to just tick them onto a list. I think. Now, when we first met, I didn't realize. And by the way, are you frozen? Because you seem to not be moving at the moment, or was it
Hey,
me?
David,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can anyone else hear me for that matter? Can someone show me a sign, like a thumbs up or have you just let me know that I'm not the one that's frozen?
he'll have to plug in again. Yeah. Are you back?
I think so. Was that me that froze?
Yeah, I was worried it was me since, I'm further away, but I think it was you. But we're back.
Yeah, it's weird because I've been having really bad problems with my internet over the last 4 months for some reason. It used to be perfect for years before. I apologize for freezing everyone. I was just going to say, yeah, it was definite sunspots, Joe Seal. I was going to say that when we met, what interests me about you, I mean, you were, I know we're talking about desert petrels, we'll talk about it in a second, but
Yeah,
what interests me about you was the fact that, you were born in Chile, you went to Toronto, you now live in California, you're this big birder, but I noticed that you had a hearing impediment.
yeah.
Can I talk to you about that? I mean, can you
Yeah.
tell us exactly what happened to you?
Well, so I have a cochlear implant right here, so you might be able to see it. And I've had this for a couple of years, but the hearing loss happened about 5, 6 years ago or so. And it it came out of the blue. You know, I've particularly, nothing really major was happening other than, sort of some stress things happening here and there. Um, and and I started feeling ill, and it happened while I was on tour in Bhutan. And there was a point in time where I started getting ringing in my ears, and I couldn't stand up at one point. And I thought, what's going on? They took me to the doctor, and inner ear problem. And eventually they realized that my whole, left side hearing was gone. And it appears to have been a virus, and a virus that was likely resident in my body, not something I caught. But my body suddenly couldn't fight it off. Something happened, something clicked, and I became deaf in one ear. You can imagine, because it was so quick. I had almost existential issues of, will I be able to be a bird guide anymore? Will I be able to go birding? Will I be able? And interestingly enough, birding was the one place I could be where I felt normal. It was social situations, being in the supermarket and other things where I felt stressed and I couldn't hear where things were coming from. And it just, was really, really sort of, I felt odd. And I would go out in nature and I would feel normal again. Or I want to say normal like I used to be. I don't want to sound like people who have a hearing impediment are abnormal, but in my mind, I felt like I used to feel. So birding almost pulled me out of it. Now that I have this implant, I'm much better. I can actually, locate birds. I still can only hear about 30% in that implanted ear, but it was a big, big, interesting journey. And one of the things that, they always say that sometimes something good comes from a negative, so some event that happens to you. And I think one of the things it's made me think about is the fact that when you're out with birdie with other people, they all have something, right? Maybe they can't see very well, or maybe they can't hear very well, or maybe they have attention deficit, or what have you. And you can't. It gave me a perspective of kind of grace to all of those things that birders have. We're not perfect, yet we can still be out there doing this. You know what I mean? Something like that. I know have some you've dealt with hearing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, when I was a toddler, I had mumps, and it basically took out the oral ear of my left, sorry, nerve of my left ear. So I had not been able to hear out of my left ear all my life.
Mhm.
In fact, I was quite surprised when I had a hearing test recently, to know that actually I have some hearing. I mean, very minuscule. I can hear or at least feel certain vibrations in my left ear.
Mhm.
And for me, I've gotten used to it,
Yeah.
But one problem I've had and always had and frustrates me is when I'm in a forest or wooded area or jungle, is locating sound. I just
Right.
sometimes have no idea where the sound's coming from. I have to really concentrate. So I become much more of a visual bird. And I've noticed, and I've mentioned this before in other episodes, that I've noticed that some birders are really good at hearing, some birders are brilliant at seeing, but very few actually got both skills. I mean, I think if anything, a lot more people can hear better. So when I
Right.
go to the States, for example, and I'm out birding with, normal people, they hear everything. And I'm like, I can't hear that. I can't hear that Swainson's thrush. I can't hear it. Um, and I think sometimes it is something to do with training your brain as well. Because if I was in the UK or Spain, I can hear a lot of things because my brain kind of thinks, right, if I listen, I should hear that sound. But when you're in
Yeah,
something completely different, you don't know what you're listening to. It takes time to actually sort of tune yourself in. And I think
right.
that there's so many of us, as you say, that have impediments, but are too ashamed to talk about it because they feel that it makes them lesser.
Right, exactly. And I mean, even before my hearing um, went, I was never a I didn't have great ears, you know. I got by, and when some of the birders were starting to get into these nocturnal flight calls, and you listen to the thrushes and the warblers, then it's these little zip notes, and whether it's a zip or a zeep or a zap, oh, I was just like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. I don't think I'm set up for this. And yet it was sort of the cutting edge, you know, and you're supposed to be on the cutting edge.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling a certain level of like, you know, I don't know, well, I won't touch that topic. And now obviously you go through and get a little older and so forth, and you realize you can still learn from that, and you can listen to the people who are good at and do this and learn from them. And you don't have to be doing every single thing in birding. And but I agree, you know, I was always more of a visual birder, and photography for me, as it's gotten better, has been a really good tool to also get a photograph of something and be able to look at it later in more detail and learn from that. And I try to use things like recording and looking at spectrograms where I can visually see a sound at times to learn from it. But yeah, I don't know why, again, why do we have to be perfect at everything, you know, and we just enjoy the bird is the main thing.
Yeah, I think in my instance, I was a kid, and when I went to school, for example, and they made a special concession for me, they said you need to sit at the front so you can hear, and I was ridiculed by other kids. Oh,
Right,
you're thick, you can't hear, you're stupid. And they're taught to you shouting at you, even though you can obviously hear. But people who haven't got those hearing problems think that you're not as intelligent because you can't hear properly.
right,
But that had a profound effect on me because I actually then stopped talking about it. I would not tell
right,
anyone. And
right.
often, like especially when I was growing up as a teenager and as a young adult, people would think I was rude because they were talking to me and I wouldn't hear them. I couldn't hear them.
Yeah,
And even more kind of perversely, I was also a DJ. I used to DJ, and my best friend used to say to me, "I don't know, you can't hear. How can you? How can you
yeah,
wear headphones and how can you mix records?" And I
yeah,
say, "Well,
yeah,
what I do is I listen with my good ear to the music, and with my deaf ear, I put the headphone on really loud so I can just feel the beat of the record I'm trying to mix in. And when the
right.
beats match, I
Yeah.
put it in. So
Well,
you adapt, don't you?"
yeah, and I mean, I spent my early year, I mean, as a teenager, I was always at the punk rock shows and all these underground music where everything was super loud. And when I remember as an adult losing my hearing, I was thinking, oh no, this is all of that catching up to me. And the doctor said, no, has nothing to do with it, you know? And I felt a little bit more like, you know, wasted youth.
Absolutely. But anyway, listen, we are here actually to talk about some amazing things that you've been discovering, and I was totally surprised about when I spoke to you before doing this because I was happy just to have a chat about birding, but you're going to tell us about the stuff that you've been working on with the storm petrels and other things. I don't know where to start with that, so I'll hand it over
Yeah.
to
So I think partially because when we were chatting, you know, the idea of conservation um, to be rolled into this chat was important. One of the things where I felt like I've had some level of impact, you know, and I don't want to take more other people involved in this have done the work, but in a way I can talk about it as I've been involved here and there. And it's about the birds that use the Humboldt Current in Chile and Peru. And that is the most productive area of the ocean on Earth. You know, it is just millions of birds and fish and whales and all sorts of things in that cold water current. And there's this avifauna of storm, what you call them petrels, we call them storm petrels, the markhams, the hornbees, sometimes known as ring, the wilsons, the elliots, the wedge-rumped. Oh, there's a whole bunch of these storm petrels that use this current in their life, and they're out there. Uh, um, and you can see them on offshore pelagic trips. Some of them are way, way offshore. In fact, they're hard to see on some pelagic trips. Yet for a long, long time, a couple of them, many of them, nobody knew where they bred. So it was this big mystery. How can we know so much? People are discovering new species in the Amazon and all this. And there's these birds that you can see by the thousands, and that nobody knows what they bred. And people would be looking in the islands, and are they on cliffs? And there was this goofball theory that they might breed inland, and the inland part is desert, right? So the desert is the absolute desert is just the driest place on earth. And that's in fact kind of what the story's about, I think. It's this goofball theory that ends up through a sort of a set of events shaping out to be something way more crazy than we ever thought. And it's to give you an idea, some of these deserts have had no rainfall detected ever since some scientists got there and put a little rain gauge. There's been zero. So they're absolutely dry. So the idea that anything could live in there is improbable. I mean, even bacteria don't live in that desert. But way back, let's say 30 years ago, I remember being in the northern city of Arica in Chile, and we're driving along in our birding tour bus and on the main highway, and I remember yelling, "Stop!" And this is the middle of nowhere. And I said, I was with Peter Burke, who's the main artist on the field for the field guide of Birds of Chile. And I said, I think I saw storm petrels right by the side of the road. We go back, and there's this dead storm petrel sitting there, right beside the road. And I remember we took it and we look at it, we photograph it, and it had down, all over its neck. We're like, this is a chick. And we look at where we are, and we're not in the full desert. We're in this little valley, like where a dry creek kind of goes through. And it all sort of says this idea that they're in the desert. This is the sign, this bird was coming back to the ocean, or it hatched from somewhere inland, and it was taking this river valley down, and it happened to hit some vehicle. And there had been other mummified storm petrels found in the desert for years. And some people said, well, these were storm blown vagrants, as the reason why they're called storm petrels in the UK is the storm petrels, because they would get blown in by these winter storms. But this is not an area that really gets storms like that. It really was not the right theory. So we had this idea that they truly are in the desert, but then how are you going to find this little bird, nesting somewhere in this expanse of, hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers of desert? And that's where the story takes kind of another turn, in that it was, I think, I mean, I wrote it down here. July 30th, 2013, I get an email from one of the people in northern Chile, and he says, hey, these folks doing a survey at night in the desert heard a nightjar, and they want you to identify what type it is. And I hear the thing, and it's like, that's not a nightjar, that's a storm petrel. And I thought, that is the colony. That has to be. Why would be a storm petrel? They have these funny, like, wailing sounds that they make. Why would it be there if it's not nesting there? And I let the word out to the local bird watching group, sort of the keener birders that were involved in an organization called the ROC, the Red de Observadores de Aves, the network of bird and nature observers. And they say, well, we're going to put together a team. We're going to go there and see what's going on. And then a couple of months later, several of them are up there and they find the nests of the Markham storm petrel. First inland nests ever in the desert of these storm petrels. And I want to say these people were not from a university. They were not necessarily trained scientists. They were architects and just birders and students that made this team, kind of ragtag team, and they started solving one of the major mysteries of South American birds, which was where do these storm petrels breed? And then once they knew what it looked like, and you could put this on a map, like a Google map, they started finding all the places that looked similar to that and had the same characteristics and geology. And they spread out over the years looking for more. And they started finding more and more and more storm petrel colonies until like the biggest sort of deal was finding where ringed or hornbeam storm petrel nests. And they found it a few years later in 2017 and were able to figure out where it was nesting. And some of these are like 50 miles inland, from the ocean. And they are traveling down these river valleys at night. And they've done other things now, like moon watching to watch the storm petrels flying over at night and doing all sorts of other things. But the cool thing is once they figured out what these nests look like, and they're often little holes just in a crack in the salt pans in the desert, they realize that storm petrels smell really, really musty and odd, like a mix of chicken feathers with fish. They started smelling every hole they would, going down the desert smelling, and that's how they quickly identified where the colonies were by smelling for these stinky birds. I think eventually they trained a dog to do it, and it got a lot more quick at it. But it is, to me, like that's sort of the first part of it. It was one of the most amazing stories in deciding or to just go for it and figure out this question. And then once they started mapping all of this, they realized mining, all sorts of desert activities that were increasing from solar power, all sorts of things that were started to be done in the desert, and it's always been a big mining area, were affecting the storm petrels. So lights around mines, and they started talking to the mine people about changing the types of lights and doing surveys and so forth. But one of the major issues in conservation of these storm petrels is lighting and activity in the desert. A place that used to have nothing now has things in it. So how to mitigate or change the way that these activities are happening, and also start making reserves for where the actual colonies are. And all of that has happened. And again, from initially the work of just birders who were interested in solving a question, explorers in a way, like explorers of figuring out how things work, rather than the university, rather than the structure of how we think ornithology and conservation happens. And I think that's really a cool part of the story too. Just average birders did this, and it's ongoing. There's another part to it, but maybe I'll stop there because I could keep on talking and I'll tell you about the
Yeah,
the
we'll definitely have the other part of it. But basically, it's going back to what we talked about in the beginning, which is people asking questions, people, not taking things for granted. It's kicked off by what you discovered, but it's really great. But you're not talking, as you say, about trained ornithologists. You're talking about people who are curious. Do you know
yeah.
the wheat, the petrels, the storm petrels in the desert, discovering their nest sites? Did that make any difference to our understanding of the numbers of birds around now? Do we think, or realize there's actually more than what there were before, or is it the same?
Yeah, it has affected. um there's part of it is there's some of them that are relatively common offshore, that it's clear that the colonies are not yet all known. So we know that and the other aspect is that Markham storm petrel seems to have two patches of colonies divided by an area where they don't breed. And what is really unusual is now one of those early birders who's become a geneticist and scientist, at one of the universities, was able to go and sample those birds and found that they have two different genetic groups. So they might be the same species, but they're breeding at different times, and they've been separated for a while based on the genetics. So suddenly, from a conservation standpoint, they're not all just Markham storm petrels, but we have population north and population south. So that has to be dealt with separately in a conservation landscape. And one of them is also in Peru, and the other one is in Chile. So you then have two countries that have to be involved in the discussion of conservations. So it branches out to understanding the more what needs to be done by having the knowledge. Yeah.
And do you think that this sort of new thinking in terms of looking for nesting petrels, storm petrels, could that be something that could happen in any desert anywhere in the world, like the Sahara or?
Um, I think there's something particularly important about the Chilean Peruvian situation in that the ocean is so productive there, and the desert is so dry. So you have almost like the best restaurant in town is the ocean, and the safest neighborhood in town is the desert, where there are no predators and so forth. I think other deserts are not nearly as dry or as predator free. So then an island might actually be the better choice for a bird, or a cliff. So I think there's something particularly important about this part of the world. And in that is my guess. But
Yeah. I've always, as a kid, thought about the Jamaican petrel,
oh yeah.
which hasn't been seen for over 100 years, maybe longer. And they famously were supposed to nest in the Blue Mountains in Jamaica. Now, is that, do you think that that would be something that ordinary birders could be looking for as well?
Yeah, I think so. I That's one of those birds that people say, well, the Jamaican petrel's extinct. Well, is it? Do we really know? And the example I can give is the very closely related a black-cap petrel that nests in Haiti and appears to have a population on Dominica. There's a they're seen from Cuba in near the mountains in the south, in the east of Cuba. They're seen offshore there, and they appear to be nesting in Cuba. Yet nobody knows or has seen a nest in Cuba of this species. So if a bird that we know is there still isn't known where the nest is, what if a bird that has only 20, 30, 40 individuals, that's very rare, like let's just be hopeful that Jamaican petrel's still out there. um those birds would disappear in the ocean. You would never have a chance to really sort of encounter them, even if there's 40 or 100, you know and then they could be in the mountaintops where nobody's really looking. So I would say, like, open mind, don't assume. And there's evidence that from Cuba that things could be missed or not known yet, so I would be hopeful. Yeah.
Well, I love your optimism. Let me just quickly ask you something off our not script, but off the subject of petrol, and that is a quick question on extinction itself, because obviously, when is something extinct? I have always believed and hoped that there are Eskimo curlews out there. And for those who don't know, a shorebird that used to nest in millions in the Canadian tundra in the summer, migrate effectively all the way down to the Pampas and back for the spring in the Arctic, Canada area. And when the European settlers first showed up, that they started shooting all of them. Plus that combined with clearing the Great Plains for crops, where the birds previously used to come and feed on grasshoppers and stuff. People will say, I mean, I was chatting the other day to someone about it, and he was basically saying, I think they're gone, full stop. And I'm thinking, well, why not? Why? How come there's people claiming to see these birds over the years. I mean, maybe not so much very recently, but certainly over the years
Yeah,
since it's supposed to
50
be
years. Yeah.
extinct. Do you what's your view on extinction? Are you eternal optimist? I mean, obviously things like dodo is gone, but
Yeah.
things like Eskimo curlew or
Not for long. Somebody wants to recreate the dodo genetically, I've heard, but and, um anyway, yeah, I think I'm optimistic when there's some information that clarifies that we don't have the entire question result. So Carolina parakeets, right, from the southeast US, they're gone because they were residents, right? They did not migrate. People live in those areas, millions of people. If somebody saw a weirdo parakeet land, they would see this, right? I mean, passenger pigeons, again, they moved within the US, but they were all in the areas where people live. They're gone. Eskimo curlew is different in that it has these had long nonstop flights where it was not just migrating with hopscotching and going by, all these places, but most of them probably went from their breeding areas to some staging area, then to Newfoundland, the coast, sort of the coast where they ate berries, and from there probably did a one single nonstop flight to the Pampas of Argentina, Uruguay. So chance of finding something that has long nonstop flights is lower than other birds. And to give you like a proper example of how this works, we know now how many Hudsonian godwits there are because we can go and count them in the wintering grounds, the tens of thousands of Hudsonian godwits. How many Hudsonian godwits are actually seen on migration in North America is not even 10% of what exists because they are mostly staging in James Bay or places far away from where people live, and then doing nonstop flights all the way to Brazil or Bolivia, where few people see them and so forth. So again, let's say there's 100 Eskimo curlews. The chance of seeing one, maybe you have a chance of seeing 10 of them at those stopover points or whatever if you could sample everything well, but we're not sampling everything well, so there could be a small migratory population that's still here. The wintering grounds and the summering grounds are still relatively good for, I mean, we have other birds that use that same type of habitat that are still here. So I think in this case I'm optimistic because of its biology. And the fact that every so often somebody has come up with a sighting that seems to, and it's not for a while now, it's been about 20 years, but there were sightings in Argentina by a park naturalist in the 90s that sounded really good, like 3 individuals of this little curlew type thing, but no photos, right? So without a photo, we really don't know if they saw something, an upland sandpiper or something. Yet I'm optimistic about that. I'm not necessarily optimistic about other things that the data's really sort of clear that they're probably gone. And if you ask about ivory-billed woodpecker, if it's here, still it's in Cuba, not in the US. So that's again a place that's not sampled very well, where it's existed. So I would say that I would have an open mind on. I don't think that all these sightings in the US, I'm not hopeful about them, but you know.
it's funny. I was talking to Victor Emmanuel. For those who don't know, he's a massive figure in ornithology in the US. He's now in his 80s, but he was one of the last people ever to see an Eskimo curlew, and he was actually telling me how what happened. And he was a kid at the time seeing it. Oh my God, it's like a dream, in terms of one of those birding dreams. Anyway,
Yeah,
digress.
1963, if I remember right. That's when that happened.
Galveston, Texas. Yeah. Anyway, we digress. Give us the second section of your story about the petrels.
Okay. Well, so one thing I've been involved in is there was in 2013, I think it was, we described a brand new species of storm petrel in Chile called the Pincoya storm petrel. And it's a very restricted range bird in an area called Chiloé in south central Chile. And it's like a
Same
little,
as widgeon, yeah, the Chiloé widgeon. Is that
yeah, Chiloé widgeons from that area. Yeah. And And it's like if you took a Wilson's petrel and put a white belly on it and white on the underwings and a bit bigger of a pale patch, that's what it looks like. And it was sort of there in front of everybody's eyes, but it wasn't seen until just 1 year. Multiple people, including myself and Ricardo Matus and Peter Harrison, all sorts of other people sort of all saw this thing at the same time. And Peter Harrison of Seabird book fame said, we need to figure this out and publish something on it. And they were able to capture them, and we published this description of a brand new species that Peter is the main author on. So this bird exists, it's new, and we don't know where it nests, right? And they've been looking, the fishermen have been there forever, and they've never seen storm petrels going into an island. And there was at that point, some people said, your new storm petrel, I think it's just a variety of variation on Wilson's, and it really isn't something new. And we thought, boy, that's worth thinking about. So this Chilean ornithologist, Heraldo Norambuena, who's the young guy who's become the local geneticist, he said, well, let's figure this out genetically. And we got all sorts of genetic materials from Wilson's and Elliott's and Galapagos storm petrels and Pincoya and everything from the Antarctic. And it turns out that it is actually genetically a distinct entity, but we found new genetic entities, including one that doesn't have a name. So we've put in another paper to describe a brand new species of storm petrel. This one's going to be trickier because it looks just like a Wilson storm petrel. But when you have your mind open to this whole inland nesting, the next stage was one time we were all sitting in Santiago, all the birders, and we were all having our Chilean wine and eating barbecued beef as we do when we have these gatherings. And we chat birds for hours. And we got onto this idea that every so often they would see storm petrels up above Santiago, like in people's yards and so forth. And again, it was thought they were storm-blown vagrants. And we said, well, how about if they're nesting up there, like right above the city, and just like the ones in the desert? And everybody was just, even though a lot of wine had been had, they said, this is not too crazy, Alvaro. I think you might be onto something. And what they did is like in the old Western movies, they had that wanted poster, with, a guy with the hat, it's like so and so. They made wanted posters for the storm petrel. And they said, if you see this thing in your house, near your house or something, let us know. We'll come and pick it up. We'll take care of it, or take a picture or whatever. So they put out these wanted posters all over the highland areas around Santiago, and they started getting all sorts of information, and including juveniles and when they were being seen, and they figured out the breeding timing. Then the next thing was to figure out, well, if these birds are going up there, roughly where are they going? And Rodrigo Barros, he put together a little expedition up in the Andes in Santiago and put some mist nets across a little creek valley, and at night caught moving storm petrels. They started looking at the moon over the city of Santiago, one of the biggest cities in South America. When there was a full moon at the right time, you can see storm petrels flying over the city, going up into the mountains. So now that thing we know it's breeding up there. We haven't figured out where it is. It's likely a new species, and it's over the biggest city in South America. Talk about urban birding, David.
Exactly.
It's amazing. And then it opens up your mind to like, well, this Pincoya storm petrel, it's probably in the mountains. It's not in the islands. So that's where this has moved to. And we may have two restricted range new species over the last 10 plus years, where this idea of the deserts has allowed us to understand that maybe they're in the mountains, which again, maybe with Jamaican petrel, these seabirds do sometimes nest in mountains, but in this case, they're well away from the ocean. and flying over major city, I think is kind of magic to think about. So that's where this is heading. So we'll see if our paper gets accepted, and we'll see if the birders can find where these birds are nesting in the Andes. And we're talking 3,000 meters in elevation. So they're way up there. It's like crazy.
Yeah, listen, this has been amazing. Such a positive conversation and such, I think, a positive vibe on birding and how to do it. I mean, it's incredible. Um, One quick question: quickly? What is your thoughts on the proposed name changes of North American birds with eponymous names?
Well, people have talked about the ad hoc committee that the AOS created to study the issue. I was on that committee. So we had to wrestle with this thing for months and months and months. And I came in on it thinking, why don't we change the ones that are of names that are really of the folks that really did the bad stuff? And we leave the names of those folks that are decent, as far as we can know, what did Wilson do to anybody anyway, or what have you. I'm simplifying the topic. But then we realize that if you start having essentially a team of ornithologists, the taxonomic committees, going through 100 different people and evaluating their morality and maybe assessing, okay, things were different in the 1700s and 1800s and so forth. That seems like not the right group of people to be doing that, right? I mean, where's the social scientists? Where's the historians? Where's a diverse set of folks that are involved in this? That didn't seem like the right group of people. It also seemed like all we would be talking about would be people and not birds. Like it would all be about politics and morality and all. So we just decided, you know what? If the AOS has already decided it's going to change some names, but in the process, I think it has to change all of them in order to avoid this political essential wrangling over who is okay, who's not okay. And to us, it just seemed cleaner. Painful, like really painful, because people, it's change is difficult, but we couldn't see how this could really work efficiently, especially thinking of and I've been on a taxonomic committee, how these things work. And would I want to be assessing whether Wilson, had an affair, or was he like did he go to church every Sunday? I mean, I don't know that that's my role as a bird person. And that's kind of where we came down on the suggestion. And it was a suggestion. Then the AOS committee decided to go with our suggestion, which we were actually kind of surprised at, really. But that's kind of how it happened. So I was kind of involved on the inside. So I have a biased view in a sense, because we went through all the discussions for months and months thinking about this. And I know some people really dislike it and some people really love it. And I think the important thing is that thousands of people care about this, and it is at least even when I get negative comments, I know people are interested in the birds and the names, and that's something. Now, I we'll see how it all ends up, but that's kind of where it came from. To tell you the truth, yeah.
Okay, I mean we've had a previous episode with Ken Kaufman talking about the positive side of that argument, and we're going to have one on the other flip side, talking with people who aren't so happy about it. So that's coming up in the schedule. So keep an eye out for it.
Yeah.
And everyone else. Now, before you go, what is your favorite bird, Alvaro?
Well, if I had to say, just off the top of my head, a bird called the Chucao tapaculo. And it looks like actually a European robin, but it's a little sneakier from the mountains of Chile and Argentina. And because it has a really distinctive song. And one of the first birds I ever heard about when I was a kid from my dad, and a bird that you hear in sort of my homeland, where my parents grew up, it's a bird that would be there in their, near where they grew up as kids. So when I see it, I feel connected in a way that's kind of deep, and I like the bird. So that's my favorite bird, I would say.
And I know you've been everywhere in the last couple of weeks, but if you could be anywhere in the world right now, where would you be?
New Zealand, because it has all sorts of wonderful seabirds, and I've never actually been there.
Wow.
So I'm going to New Zealand at the end of this year on we're doing a subantarctic New Zealand, Australia birding tour with Alvaro's Adventures. So it'd be my first time down there looking at all these seabirds. So I'm so excited. So if anybody's interested, actually look us up.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to come with you one day as well, to be honest. So, you know what to do, guys. All right. Well, listen, thank you for such a positive conversation today. It's been, I mean, I can carry on talking with you the rest of today. In fact, one day we're going to do that. We're going to chew the fat over a pair of
Yeah,
binoculars, or two pairs of binoculars. Thank you very much, Alvaro, for sparing your time.
thank you.
And thank you, Zoomers, also for being supportive and watching. And thank you for all the people watching on YouTube as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But in the meantime, keep looking up at those petrels.